After work at 5:30 one day, a man brings his best friend home for dinner. Unfortunately, he didn't tell his wife. So she begins screaming at him, and his friend just sits down and listens. She said, "My hair and my makeup are not done. The house is a mess. The dishes are not done. I'm still in my pajamas. And I didn't fix dinner tonight. Why in the world did you bring him home?" And her husband said, "Because he's thinking of getting married." The moral of this is never make a woman mad. She can remember stuff that hasn't even happened yet. Now, if any of you get upset about this, it's only a test. I want to make sure Veronica, and that's my wife, is listening today to the sermon, so I can test her on that. Although I have to be careful about what I say because she might not let me in the door tonight. Well, anyway, a merry heart is and does good like a medicine. A number of years ago, when we were still in our former church, we took a feast cruise from Fort Lauderdale in Florida. It stopped at Columbia. The port there, I think, was Cartagena, and then a number of other ports that are common to cruises in the Caribbean. We took two of our granddaughters with us, and at the beginning of the first service, they were wide-eyed as they watched a number of brethren raising their voices in song service, but also raising their hands. And later, during the special music, a small chorale from New York did special music, and they had a really lively, upbeat, very animated, and a fast tempo song. And the girls looked over at us with puzzled looks on their faces, since this was all totally unlike what they had heard before in church. They lived in Vancouver, Washington, and attended the Portland church, so they were used to what you would consider to be a traditional type of service. And so this was a major change for them. Well, that same chorale became an integral part of the services during the feast, but I don't think the girls at that point ever fully adjusted to it. It was really upbeat music, and when I heard Pat and Rachel playing, I was thinking of that. It's a little more, upbeat, and that I enjoyed that because I played in a small dance band in high school. And for 23 years, I did a volunteer stint for Bellevue College hosting a radio program featuring jazz. So I was used to that kind of music. Anyway, when I think of that, that was, as you recall, those of you who were around when worldwide began changing their format, and this was part of what was happening. But when I think of that, I think about 2 Samuel 6, verse 16, which is a little different, but there's a concept here. 2 Samuel 6, verse 16, where the ark of the Lord was being brought into the city by David, and his wife, Saul's daughter, Michal, looked through a window and saw her husband, King David, leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. She criticized him for dancing in the streets and unintentionally exposing himself during the process after returning from a major victory over the Philistines, and also the return of the ark. In our current day and age, unless we were living in Scotland where men still wear kilts, this probably could not occur in this modern day. But anyway, David was exuberant. He was praising God because of his victory and the return of the ark. If you've ever watched any of the World War II movies, you, I'm sure, remember seeing pictures of the Allied troops as they would enter a city that had been taken back. And I'm thinking in particular of pictures of the Allied troops, their tanks and armored cars rolling through the streets of Paris after it had been retaken by the Allies. A total and complete spirit of celebration had enveloped the city after being liberated from 4 years of occupation by the Germans. Young ladies reached up, and there are pictures of them kissing the soldiers sitting on the tanks and the trucks, who were complete strangers to them, but they didn't care. They didn't, know them, but all they cared about is the fact that they had been, they were just thankful and grateful they'd been responsible for freeing the city from the tyranny of Hitler's Nazis. Just as the Parisians were thankful to the Allies, we certainly should praise God for everything he's done. Not only has done, is doing right now and will do in the future for us. If we have a problem we are really struggling with, and we don't know what to do, we don't have to go to bed and then toss and turn all night fretting about it and thinking about it and worrying about it. We can turn it over to God and get a good night's sleep. He's going to be up all night anyway. I heard someone say that one time, and I thought that's very true. God's not on the same schedule as we are. When we go to bed, he's not sleeping, he's still working. Anyway, why not let him work with it and let us know what to do in the morning? That may be an oversimplification, but it does demonstrate the point, because God does give his beloved sleep. Turn to Psalm 127, verse 2. Psalm 127, verse 2. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sleep. So, that's not saying if you have to go to work early that you don't get up early, or conversely, if you're doing something that takes a little extra time at night, you don't go to sleep. But on average, in a normal day, you don't have to be concerned with problems to the point where your schedule is completely changed. We need to realize that we're not average. We're not ordinary. I think many times we think that, but we're special. We are designed to leave our mark because of the part God is playing in our lives. It doesn't matter really how you were raised. It can affect you, but in the long run, it's not as important, or what kind of education we have, or what kind of background we came from. Those things can be changed. Whether we have connections, whether we know someone, or know someone that knows someone, or who we don't know, or what kind of obstacles we face. When we believe what the Bible says about us, that we are special, that we're not ordinary, doors will open and events will occur that we never expected. Gideon was hiding in a wine press for fear of the Midianites, and we can find that in Judges 6, so if you'll turn there, I'd like to look at a few verses. Judges 6, beginning in verses 1 and 2. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years, and because of this, the Israelites were living in dens in the mountains and caves. And I've kind of paraphrased that just to get the gist of the story. And in verses 3 and 4, it talks about what happened to the Israelites and the things that happened to their crops. Everything that they had sowed, the enemy destroyed. The livestock, sheep, oxen, and donkeys. In other words, they conducted a scorched earth policy. They just took care of everything. And so verse 6, and Israel cried unto the Lord. Of course, we see that repeated numerous times in the Old Testament, where they get over their head, and so they cry to God, and of course, he responded. In verse 12, continuing, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto Gideon and said unto him, the Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. And so Gideon is standing there by himself, and he kind of looks around and thinks, who are you talking to? It's certainly not me. That maybe it's that guy over there. Or did you mean him? He said, it couldn't be me. Gideon had a list of excuses, but none of them mattered to God. Well, God, just like Gideon, God is calling us to be mighty heroes, and I'm not talking about a Steven Seagal kind of hero with his arsenal of karate and judo moves. Say, are we going to disagree with God and like Gideon start making excuses as to why we can't do what he wants us to do? Verse 15. And so he finally addresses the angel of the Lord who was sent to him, and he's talking to the angel, and he says, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. I don't have any standing, and, we don't have any financial backing. We might not say the exact same nowadays, but we might say something like, and I've heard different people say things like this, I've had a lousy family environment. I didn't have any guidance, and the only things I've had are bad breaks. Someone else got the promotion of work that I should have received. No one would help me with my plans. I wonder what dreams would have come true, what obstacles I could have overcome, what business I could have started, what books I could have written, what influence I could have exerted if I'd only had someone to help, et cetera, going on ad infinitum. You mean none of us have ever had thoughts like that? Verse 16, and the Lord said unto him, surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. And then Gideon said, then show me a sign that thou talkest with me. Gideon needed proof. And verse 21, and the angel told him what to do, which he did. He brought an offering. And verse 21, then the angel of the Lord put forth the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the flesh and the unleavened cakes that Gideon had provided. And there rose up fire out of the rock and consumed the flesh and the unleavened cakes. Then the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. And verse 25, and it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, take thy father's young bullock, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it, and build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock. Then Gideon took 10 men and did as the Lord had said unto him at night, because he feared his father and the men of the city. So he is afraid of his own father in doing something like this. He didn't know what kind of reaction his father would say or do. Verse 29, and they said one to another, who hath done this thing? Wondering who had thrown down the altar of Baal. And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon the son of Joash hath done this thing. Then the men said unto Joash, bring out thy son that he may die. Verse 34, but the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and Abiezriel was gathered after him. Verse 36, and Gideon said unto God, if thou wilt save Israel by my hand, as thou hast said. And here in verses, I'm not going to read them, but verses 37 through 40, he presents God with another test to get proof that this, that he was listening to someone that had the power to do the things that he had asked Gideon to do. He gave God another series of tests, which of course he passed, and you can read in chapter 7 of Judges how Gideon carried out God's plan for him. He didn't feel like a mighty hero, but in the end he stood up and believed what God said about him. He fulfilled his destiny. It didn't come from his influence or his wealth. Nothing about his circumstances looked like what God said. He was just an ordinary person in his own eyes, but God saw something more. God calls us what we are to become, but then we have to apply a little elbow grease to do our part. If we believe his promises, then it is incumbent upon us to get it down in our mind and spirit so it will become a reality. Instead of letting someone else define us or label us, we need to go back to what God says about us, because he's the one who made us. Like Gideon, we may not fully realize who we are. God sent an angel to remind Gideon. Then he rose up and he left his mark, his place in biblical history. An angel might not appear to us, but probably at this time in the history, that may be written about this era. God may use one of his ministers to remind us who we are. We are mighty heroes. We're God's masterpieces. We are strong, we're valuable, we're talented, we're confident, we're healthy, we're forgiven. If you think of those things, they're all true. We are sons and daughters of God, just like we look at our own sons, our own daughters, and we only want the best for them. And we do our best as parents and grandparents and great-grandparents to provide that for them. Well, similarly, God does the same thing for us. We need to put our shoulders back and hold our heads erect and step up today to do what we were created to do. And I'm not talking about like Marines spit and polish, and you've seen pictures of them in motion pictures and in real life probably, where they stand erect and whip up a salute and walk like this. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, you want to have people in the military who are protecting you to be that kind of confident or exhibit that kind of confidence. You know, not like Marines that are stiff and erect, or like models that you see on catwalks or runways showing off the latest fashion. They stand erect and they're poised and they carry themselves in a certain way. But the one thing that I've noticed, that very seldom they crack a smile. I mean, this is serious business to them. But anyway, we want to face the future, if we don't do it physically, at least emotionally, with that kind of enthusiasm, with that kind of confidence, knowing as sons and daughters of God, that we can face the future that way. Doors will open for us. New opportunities will come our way. We will see the fulfillment of our destiny occur. You know, when an architect begins to build a building, he designs the exterior, planning for, you know, what color it's going to be, what size it's going to be, the shape it will be. That, of course, is very important, but it's not going to be any use at all if he designs, unless he designs the inner structure as well. You know, any of you in the building trades realize that the weight of each floor, or how much wind it can withstand, or recently in our area, how much water is likely to run against or through a building, will play an important part regarding its design. The total weight of the building has to be calculated so each floor will be able to accommodate the weight of the computers, the desks, the furniture, or anything else that's going to be stored in that particular floor, I should say. Since every business is unique, what may be necessary or special for one may not be as important for another. And one floor maybe has very light materials and few people, so it's designed one way, and another, but I'm sure they're all designed with some kind of a maximum potential for weight. But they do take these things into consideration. Then the builders will know how many steel beams they'll need. They'll need to know how far down into the ground they need into the earth to construct the foundation. The building has to be responsible for the stresses it will be expected to endure. California has special building codes because of the earthquakes, the big one that they're expecting someday. And we in Washington, in this Puget Sound area, have the same type of thing. If you live in the Gulf states that are frequently pummeled by hurricanes, the glass in buildings is stronger to compensate for the high winds. If you live in the far north or the far south, the buildings have more insulation to keep the cold out and the heat in, or vice versa. If you build here in the Cascades, the pitch of the roof is much steeper to shed excessive snow from accumulating to a point where, if enough weight is formed from a heavy snow, it might potentially collapse the roof and cause a whole building to collapse. You know, it might not be as apparent to us, and we may not notice that some areas are in floodplains. And the only thing that may stand out is the fact that homes are often built with high foundations. And that's one thing that I've noticed out in the Snohomish area and also up in the area of Mount Vernon, because there's the potential of flooding. And of course, this past few weeks ago, we saw a lot of flooding up in the northern part of the state near the border, because it was totally unexpected. Well, you can go on and look at any section of the U.S. or the world for that matter and see that the same considerations apply. The architects design each structure so it can endure the stresses and the pressures it will face in that particular environment. The good news is that is how God has designed us. He is our architect. He's laid out a plan for each one of our lives. He's calculated everything we're going to face in our life, all of the pressures, all of the stresses, all of the winds, all of the storms, and has factored in the weight of living in general. He's taken it all into account. He's calculated how many hurts, heartaches, injustices, mistakes that may affect us are going to occur. We all make mistakes, as you heard in the sermonette. And he put in us the strength to endure them, the tenacity to rise above them. So no matter what pushes against us, it will not be too much to bear. We were designed to endure until our dreams come to pass. You know, when something happens that we've never faced, a loss, a setback, a disappointment of some kind, it's tempting to think, well, you know, I can't handle this. It's just too overwhelming. It's going to put me down and out. You know, the truth is we don't always really know what's in us until we have that additional pressure, until that additional weight comes to bear. We don't know what we can endure until it happens. But our architect knew ahead of time what we would be facing. And that was why he made the glass so strong. He took into account the winds he knew we would encounter. Nothing we face can cause us to collapse. We, of course, can choose to collapse in our mind and just give up. You know, it's easy to think, well, I'm way over my head. Life is just too much. It has been this way too long, and I can't change anything. This is a time we need to realize that we are, or that we've been designed so no weapon formed against us will prosper. The difficulty didn't come to stay. We're told to be strong and of good courage. The Lord our God is with us. You know, when I look back over my life, and I'm sure you can do the same thing, at a few critical points when I should have been overwhelmed, when I think back, I should have gotten stuck. My mom had mental problems and went off the deep end when I was in the 8th grade. And I think about my brother and I being in the back of a patrol van looking through the wire barriers, you know, separating the back from the front, just like you see in movies. And it was funny because I was laughing about it. I thought, this is just like in the movies, except, we're not convicts, but they're treating us like them. Well, the reason we were back there, they were taking us to the shelter for children, because when they picked mom up in the evening, Dad was working a swing shift, so he wouldn't have been home until midnight, and they didn't want to leave, small children at home, so that's why we had the experience. But nonetheless, that could have been very, very traumatic, depending upon how I looked at it. And in this case, it was just humorous, and it was exciting. I got a chance to ride in a police car. But later on, there was a divorce that split my family apart. And my mom and dad died within 2 months of each other, a little later. And I probably could dredge up a few more, but that isn't important. Those were experiences, and I look at them as being valuable because it's really a lot easier for me to sit and counsel with someone or just talk to someone who's going through a divorce or who has lost someone through death. And I totally can understand it. I can empathize and sympathize with the person because I've had the experience. And so sometimes these things, we can't see it when we're going through it. It's going to put us down. But years later, you can think back and then you can understand. Well, you can all look at those critical junctures in your lives and see, we can all look at them and see we lived through them. The fact we're sitting here today listening to this proves that. At these times of stress, we all discover how we've been designed to endure and handle the pressure. But, and this is really important, if we don't face life's pressures, we may never discover who we really are. If you were like a Pollyanna, could go through life and never have any problems whatsoever, you would never discover who you really were because you never had anything to fight against. You had never had anything to struggle with. You never had any decisions you required or that were required. The higher we go, the more pressure there can be, or there will be. The good news is that we can handle it. We've been given the right beams. We've been given the right structure to do so. When something new appears in our lives, when we experience more pressure, more weight, when we face more opposition, we don't need to let it overwhelm us. We need to let it inspire us. This means God is about to add a new floor to his building. He is about to take us higher. We are going to discover an ability we didn't realize we possessed. Paul had all kinds of unfair things happen to him. You've heard him, for many years. He was put into prison without a trial. He was in a shipwreck. He spent the night on the open sea, bitten by a poisonous snake, and a number of other things, betrayed by false brethren. But still, he's the one that said in 2 Corinthians 2:14, thanks to God who always causes us to triumph in Christ. God wants us to be winners. He says that he always causes us to triumph. He said we're hard pressed on every side, but we're not crushed. So there's the pressure. There's the pressure to test us and see what we're capable of doing, what we can endure, what we can do as a result of that pressure. But we're not crushed. It doesn't totally destroy us. He's saying we've been designed for the difficulty. Our architect has designed us, taking into consideration all of the weight, all of the trouble, all of the bad breaks. And he's given us the strength and the courage and the fortitude to stand. And here again, you can go back and say, well, I wasn't brought up in a good home. I didn't have anyone encouraging me. Maybe some of those things aren't fair, but we have the beams to withstand the way they have affected our lives. We have the infrastructure to rise above the problems no matter what they may be. When the pressure comes, we can say, thank you, Father. Thank you for restoring my health. Thank you for being for me, because you're significantly more important than those in the world who are against me or who are not for me. Maybe some of us are experiencing a test right now, today, and during the time I've been speaking to you, in the back of your mind has been rolling it over and over. What am I going to do? What decisions will I make that'll affect my life or affect someone else's life or life in my family or another church member's? Well, we already have what we need. We need to take hold of God's strength, and instead of thinking how difficult everything is, turn it around and say, which we've heard repeatedly, I can do all things through Christ, and I've been armed for this battle. I'm not alone. I'm not stuck out here on an island all by myself. I have help. I can face difficult times, and I can deal with them. I may walk through the valley of the shadow of death, as many we know this past year have done. And if you notice the number of prayer requests that have been sent out from various places around the world where the insidious COVID virus has found victims among church members, you realize that we have been under siege. But you know what? I know a secret, and so do you. The valley is not our home. We're just passing through it. It's not a destination. Instead, it's a highway. It is just a temporary juncture or detour on our road to a fantastic future. We have the assurance that we will come out stronger, better, and more victorious to new levels of our destiny. Whatever we face, we need to remind ourselves that we have been designed by the supreme architect to handle it. It's not because we're so great, but because that architect designed us with everything that we will need. Sure, we may not be able to see it all from the outside, but God has put incredible tools in our minds and in our brains. We don't fully realize all that we're capable of being. We have beams that will allow us to go further than we are today. Infrastructure that will take us higher. You know, we may be doing today what it takes to go up 6 stories when God knows that we're capable of going up to 12 stories or even higher. He not only designed us to increase, but to withstand the winds, to outlast the opposition, to overcome the unfair circumstances that you all have faced. When we're tempted to think, well, life is overwhelming. This is just too much, and I don't think I can handle it anymore. If you're able to see what God has put in you, the courage, the strength, the determination, then you will be able to understand that you can handle it. He has designed you to withstand it. May God breathe new life into your spirit so you'll remain undamaged by every storm, outlast every attack, overcome every obstacle, and become everything that God created you to be.